It's strange what disappears first. Not the big things. Not the house, or the shared accounts, or the routines you build without thinking. It's the ordinary stuff. The sound of someone moving around in the next room. The comfort of knowing there's a familiar presence nearby, even if you aren't speaking. The way you can set 2 cups on the counter without wondering if one of them is unnecessary now. I still catch myself doing it sometimes. Reaching for things out of habit. Expecting a certain kind of warmth to exist in the space between us. And then remembering that something essential has already been taken. Not stolen in a dramatic way. Not ripped away in a single moment. Just, gone. I didn't lose my marriage in an explosion. It wasn't shouting or slammed doors. It was quieter than that. Like waking up one day and realizing you've been living in a different life than the one you thought you had. I think that's what stays with me the most. The quietness. People imagine betrayal as this sharp, violent thing. A sudden wound. But for me, it felt more like standing in the aftermath of a storm that passed while I was asleep, looking around at the damage and not understanding when it happened. There was no clear before and after. Just an after. I remember sitting in the same room I'd sat in 1,000 times before, looking at the same furniture, the same familiar corners, and feeling like I was seeing it all through glass. Like I didn't belong there anymore. And the worst part is, nothing looked different. That's what makes it so unsettling. The world doesn't rearrange itself to match what you've learned. Everything stays in place. The lights still work. The clock still ticks. The air still feels normal. But you don't. There was a moment, not the moment of truth, not the moment of confession, not anything so clear, but a smaller one. A moment that didn't seem important at the time. It was something simple. Something I could have brushed off. Probably did, at first. A pause where there shouldn't have been one. A look that didn't quite land. A feeling that the room had shifted by an inch, and only I noticed. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even suspicion, not really. It was discomfort. The kind that creeps in quietly, like cold air through a crack you didn't know was there. I remember thinking, just for a second, that something was off. And then immediately telling myself I was tired. Overthinking. Being unfair. Because noticing means crossing a line. Once you start paying attention, you can't unsee what you've already felt. Safety doesn't disappear all at once. It fades. It thins out. And you don't realize how much you depended on it until it's no longer there. I didn't know then what I know now. I only knew that something ordinary had started to feel unfamiliar. And that the life I trusted was already beginning to fracture in ways I couldn't name yet. When I think back to how we were before everything cracked, what stands out isn't passion or conflict. It's stability. Things worked. That was the word I would have used at the time. Our days followed a rhythm that didn't require much thought. We woke up around the same time. We shared meals when our schedules lined up. We talked about logistics, plans, things that needed to get done. Nothing felt urgent because nothing seemed wrong. I took a lot of comfort in that. I believed that showing up consistently was the same as being present. That keeping things running smoothly meant I was doing my part. I handled my responsibilities. I stayed out of trouble. I didn't disappear. To me, that felt like commitment. Looking back, I realize how narrow my definition of effort was. I don't remember us arguing much in those years. Disagreements came and went, but they were usually small. Manageable. The kind you solve by being practical. I mistook the absence of conflict for proof that we were fine. If she was quiet, I assumed she was tired. If she seemed distant, I told myself everyone needs space. I didn't ask many follow-up questions. Not because I didn't care, but because I thought caring meant not pushing. I thought giving room was respectful. I didn't understand yet how easily space can turn into distance when no one is checking the gap. We talked about the future in general terms. Not with excitement, exactly, but with confidence. Like it was already decided and didn't need much attention. I believed we were past the fragile stage of having to constantly reaffirm things. That belief made me lazy in ways I didn't recognize. I remember moments when she tried to pull me into conversations I wasn't ready for. Not confrontations. Just attempts to talk about feelings, about how things felt between us. I usually listened for a minute, nodded, and then tried to solve whatever problem I thought she was describing. If I couldn't fix it quickly, I'd suggest we talk later. There was always later. At the time, I saw myself as steady. Reliable. The calm one. I didn't see how that steadiness might have felt like indifference from the other side. I didn't notice how often she adjusted herself to match my energy instead of the other way around. I assumed that if something were truly wrong, she would say it clearly. What I didn't understand was that she was saying it, just not in a way I recognized as serious. I expected alarms. She was giving signals. And because nothing exploded, because nothing demanded immediate attention, I kept moving forward under the assumption that we were solid. I didn't feel like I was losing anything. That's the unsettling part. From where I stood, the ground felt firm. Familiar. Predictable. I had no idea that what I thought was stability was slowly becoming something else entirely. Or that the foundation I trusted so completely was already beginning to hollow out beneath us. The distance didn't arrive like a decision. No one sat down and said, "We're going to stop reaching for each other now." It happened the way dust gathers. Quietly. Slowly. Without anyone noticing until it's everywhere. At first, it was small. A conversation that didn't go anywhere. A touch that didn't last. A question answered with something practical instead of something honest. We still lived side by side, still shared space, still moved through the same routines. From the outside, it probably looked normal. That's what makes it so easy to miss. Distance doesn't always look like coldness. Sometimes it looks like functioning. I started spending more time wrapped up in my own world. Work, responsibilities, the constant pull of things that felt urgent. I told myself I was doing it for us. Building stability. Being dependable. But dependable isn't the same as connected. There were nights I came home and felt like I was walking into a place that was technically mine, but emotionally, unclear. Like the air had changed and I couldn't explain why. She would be there, doing something ordinary. Folding laundry. Making dinner. Watching something on her phone. And I would feel this brief impulse to step closer, to ask how she was really doing. And then I wouldn't. Not because I didn't want to. Because it felt awkward. Like interrupting something. Like we were out of practice. That's how you know something is shifting. When closeness starts to require effort instead of instinct. I remember her trying, in quiet ways. She'd mention something about her day and pause, waiting. Sometimes she'd ask, "Are you okay?" even when I wasn't visibly upset. Sometimes she'd sit near me on the couch, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. I noticed those things. I just didn't respond the way she needed. I'd give half answers. I'd nod. I'd say, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." Tired became my default. It was always tired. And the truth is, I was tired. But not in the way I thought. I was tired of thinking deeply about things that didn't have clear solutions. I was tired of emotions that couldn't be handled like tasks. So I stayed on the surface. And she started doing the same. At some point, her attempts became less frequent. Not all at once. Just gradually. Like someone lowering their voice when they realize they aren't being heard. We stopped asking certain questions. Not out of anger. Out of resignation. That's what scares me in hindsight. Resignation is quieter than resentment. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles in. We became good at being polite. We became efficient. We became a pair of people managing a life instead of living inside it together. And because nothing was openly broken, I told myself nothing was wrong. I didn't see the imbalance forming. She was still reaching, just less obviously. Still hoping, just more privately. And I was still present, technically, while being emotionally elsewhere. I thought love was supposed to feel steady, calm, predictable. I didn't realize that predictability can turn into absence when no one is paying attention. Connection doesn't snap in half. It wears down. Thread by thread. Until one day, you look up and realize you're holding something that used to be a bond. And now feels more like a habit you don't know how to name. The unease didn't arrive with a clear message. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't fear. It was more like a low, persistent hum I couldn't quite place. Easy to ignore. Easier to explain away. At first, I thought it was me. Stress has a way of distorting things. So does guilt, even when you don't recognize it as guilt yet. I assumed the discomfort was coming from how distant I'd been, how much I'd let things drift. I told myself that if something felt off, it was probably because I hadn't been showing up the way I should. That explanation felt responsible. Safe. There were small moments that stood out, but none of them were dramatic enough to hold on to. She seemed lighter sometimes. Not happier exactly, just less weighed down. Like someone who had found a place to set something heavy aside. I noticed it and felt relieved at first. Told myself it meant things were improving. Other times, she felt far away in a different way. Present, but guarded. Like she was choosing her words carefully even when the topic didn't seem to matter. I remember asking a simple question once, something ordinary, forgettable. Her response came a second too late. Just long enough for me to notice the pause. She smiled afterward. It looked normal. I remember thinking, that was strange. And then immediately dismissing it. People hesitate. People get distracted. I didn't want to be the kind of person who reads into things that don't deserve attention. I prided myself on being rational. Calm. Reasonable. So I stayed that way. There were moments when she'd step out to take a call instead of answering it nearby. Moments when she'd go quiet in the middle of a conversation and then change the subject. Moments when I felt like I'd arrived late to something I didn't know was happening. None of it added up to anything solid. And that's the problem with early unease. It doesn't give you permission to act. It just sits there, making you feel uncomfortable for reasons you can't justify. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask direct questions. Part of me didn't want the answers. Another part was afraid of what it would say about me if I asked and was wrong. So I did what I'd always done. I rationalized. I told myself we were in a strange phase. That relationships ebb and flow. That closeness looks different over time. I reminded myself that she had her own inner world, and that respecting it meant not prying. But respect can become avoidance when you use it as an excuse. There was a specific moment, I still don't know why that one stuck, when I caught a look on her face that didn't feel meant for me. Not secrecy exactly. More like containment. Like she was holding something in and didn't know whether to let it out. It lasted maybe a second. I looked away. That was the line, even if I didn't know it then. The invisible one you cross the moment you notice something and choose not to follow it. After that, the hum got louder. Not enough to demand action. Just enough to make everything feel slightly unstable. Like walking across a floor you trust while sensing that one board might be weak. I didn't know where it would give way. I only knew that the sense of safety I'd been leaning on so easily no longer felt automatic. And that once discomfort settles in, it doesn't leave just because you refuse to name it. The truth didn't come the way I imagined it would. If I'm honest, I think part of me expected that if something was ever really wrong, it would announce itself. That there would be an argument, a discovery, some kind of dramatic collision that forced everything into the open. Instead, it was quiet. Almost careful. She asked me to sit down. That alone felt strange, not because sitting down is unusual, but because of the tone. The way she said it. Like she was preparing to tell me something that couldn't be softened. I remember looking at her face, trying to read it. There was no panic. No visible guilt. Just a stillness I couldn't place. I said something stupid, something automatic. "What's going on?" She took a breath. And then she told me. Simple words. Direct. No build-up. I was with someone else. That was it. No tears. No excuses. No long explanation. Just honesty, offered like a fact. For a moment, I didn't understand what she meant. Not because it was unclear, but because my mind refused to let it land. Like hearing a sentence in a language you speak fluently but can't process because it doesn't belong in your life. I blinked. I stared at her. I waited for the rest. She didn't rush to fill the silence. I felt my body react before my thoughts caught up. Heat in my chest. A tightening in my throat. The sharp instinct to stand up, to pace, to do something physical because sitting still felt impossible. My first emotion was anger. Clean anger. The kind that feels righteous because it gives you a role. The wronged one. The betrayed one. The person who gets to be certain. I remember saying, "Why?" Not shouting. Just, stunned. She looked at me for a long second. And then she said something that didn't sound like a defense. It sounded like a truth she'd been holding for a long time. I didn't feel seen anymore. That phrase hit differently than I expected. Not because it excused anything. It didn't. But because it didn't feel like a lie. I wanted her to say something messier. Something easier to hate. I wanted denial, or desperation, or a version of this that let me stay angry without complication. Instead, she was calm in a way that made me feel unsteady. I asked, "How long?" She hesitated, just slightly. "Long enough," she said. That was all. The room felt too quiet for what was happening inside me. I kept waiting for emotion to show up on her face in a recognizable way. For regret. For fear. But what I saw was exhaustion. Like someone who had already lived through the hardest part before speaking it out loud. I remember thinking, this can't be real. And then, almost immediately after, another thought surfaced. A memory. A night I stayed late without calling. A weekend where I barely looked up from my screen. A conversation she tried to start that I shut down with, "Not now." They came in flashes, not as evidence, but as weight. The anger didn't disappear, but it shifted. It got tangled with something else. Something uncomfortable. Because the betrayal was clear. But so was the emptiness that had existed before it. I sat there, staring at the floor, trying to hold on to the simplicity of blame. Trying to keep the story clean. Cheating is cheating. That should have been the end of it. But the longer the silence stretched between us, the harder it was to pretend this had come from nowhere. She wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. We were just two people sitting in the ruins of something that had been falling apart long before either of us admitted it. I finally said, quietly, "So that's it?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was soft. "I don't know," she said. "I just couldn't keep living like I didn't exist." That was the moment something inside me cracked, not into forgiveness, not into understanding, but into awareness. The truth wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was worse. It was calm. And once it was spoken out loud, there was no way to return to the version of us that didn't know. Because the life I thought we had was already gone the moment I finally saw what had been missing. After she said it, nothing moved the way it was supposed to. I always thought betrayal would create immediate clarity. That the lines would sharpen. That I would know exactly what to feel, exactly what to do. But instead, everything blurred. The anger stayed, but it didn't stay clean. It mixed with disbelief. With humiliation. With grief. With something I didn't want to admit was there at all. I walked around for days feeling like I was carrying a heavy object in my chest, something solid and unspeakable. I went through motions. I answered emails. I nodded at conversations I didn't hear. And underneath all of it was the same looping thought. This happened. This is real. Sometimes I would catch myself almost forgetting for a split second, the way you forget a loss before remembering again. And then it would hit all over. I wanted to blame her completely. That would have been easier. A simple story, she did something unforgivable, and I was the one who suffered. But the simplicity wouldn't hold. Because every time I tried to stay in that place, memories kept pushing in. Not excuses. Just reminders. The way I'd stopped asking questions. The way I'd treated silence like peace. The way I'd been physically present while emotionally unavailable, convincing myself that providing stability was enough. I didn't 'cause what she did. I know that. But I couldn't stop wondering about the space we'd created together, the one she stepped out of before I even realized it was empty. I remember one night after the confession, standing in the kitchen while she was in the other room. The house was quiet. Everything looked the same. And I thought, how long have we been strangers in here? When we finally talked again, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a confrontation with shouting or slammed doors. It was slow and awkward, like two people speaking through thick glass. I asked her, "Did you ever think about telling me before?" She looked down. "I tried," she said. That answer made something twist in me. Because I wanted to argue. To say, "No, you didn't." To insist that I would have listened. But I couldn't be sure. I remembered moments she'd started sentences and then stopped. I remembered her sitting beside me, waiting for something I didn't give. I remembered how often I'd said, "Not right now." There's a particular kind of regret that doesn't come from one terrible choice, but from 100 small ones. The kind you barely notice while you're making them. I told her, "You could have left." She nodded. "I know." That was all. No defense. No attempt to make it okay. Just acknowledgement. And that somehow made it harder. Because it meant she wasn't trying to paint herself as innocent. She was just honest about being tired. I found myself trapped between two truths. 1. What she did broke something fundamental. 2. What we had before it happened wasn't whole. I hated that both could exist at the same time. I wanted the betrayal to erase everything else, to make my own failures irrelevant. But life doesn't work that way. The act was hers. The emptiness was ours. And sitting with that ambiguity felt unbearable. Some nights, I lay awake replaying the last few years, looking for the exact moment things turned. As if I could find a single decision that would explain it all. But there wasn't one. Just slow neglect. Slow drifting. Slow quiet. I started to realize that the affair wasn't the beginning of the destruction. It was the moment the destruction became impossible to ignore. That didn't soften it. It didn't make it forgivable. It just made it complicated in a way I wasn't prepared for. Because when blame stops being simple, you don't get the comfort of righteousness. You only get the uncomfortable mirror of your own absence. And the question of whether love died in one act, or in everything that came before it. The days that followed didn't feel like an ending. They felt like a strange suspension. There was no clear conclusion, no moment where everything was decided and neatly separated. Just a slow unfolding of consequences, the kind that doesn't arrive all at once but keeps showing up in small, unexpected ways. We moved around each other carefully. Sometimes we spoke. Sometimes we didn't. Sometimes I caught myself almost acting normal, and then the weight of what I knew would return, heavy and immediate. Like touching a bruise you forgot was there. People ask questions when something like this happens. Not always directly, but you can feel it. Are you leaving? Are you staying? Are you okay? I never knew how to answer. Because the truth was, I didn't even know what okay meant anymore. There were moments when I felt certain. Moments when I thought, this is unforgivable. This is the line. And then there were moments when I remembered the quiet years before it. The slow distance. The ways we both disappeared in plain sight. Certainty didn't last. It kept slipping through my hands. I started to understand something I hadn't wanted to. Sometimes validation doesn't come as relief. Sometimes it comes as a heavier truth. I wanted someone to tell me I was right. I wanted the world to agree that betrayal was simple. But the longer I sat with it, the more I realized that simplicity was a kind of comfort I no longer had access to. Because I could see too much now. I could see how loneliness doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like silence. I could see how neglect doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like distraction. And I could see how people can hurt each other without meaning to, until one day the hurt becomes undeniable. That awareness didn't excuse what she did. It didn't erase it. It just made the aftermath feel less like a courtroom and more like a wreckage. Two people standing in the remains of something they both failed to protect in different ways. If you've made it this far into the story, take a second to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment below, because stories like this aren't about easy answers, they're about the questions that stay with you. That's what I was left with. Questions. Not closure. Not revenge. Just the lingering sense that something important had been lost long before it was officially gone. And even now, I don't know what hurts more. The betrayal itself. Or the realization that part of me saw the emptiness coming, and still didn't stop it. I used to believe relationships ended in clear ways. A decision. A breaking point. A moment where one person does something, and the other person walks away, and the story makes sense. I don't believe that anymore. What happened to us didn't fit neatly into a lesson. It didn't hand me a clean conclusion. It left me with a kind of moral discomfort that still hasn't settled. Because betrayal is real. It's damaging. It changes the shape of trust in a way that doesn't fully return. But so does absence. So does indifference. So does the slow erosion of attention, the quiet decision to stop reaching because life feels too busy, too tiring, too routine. I've replayed everything more times than I can count. Not because I think I'll find a different outcome. But because part of me keeps searching for a moment where it could have been interrupted. A point where either of us could have said, we're losing each other. And meant it. I know people will have opinions. Some will say there's no complexity here. That one act defines everything. That betrayal is betrayal, full stop. Others will say love doesn't collapse overnight, and that loneliness inside a relationship can be its own kind of damage. I understand both. That's what makes it hard. Because the truth is, I can hold her responsible and still recognize myself in the emptiness that came before. I can acknowledge that what she did broke something sacred. And still wonder how long it had already been breaking. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I don't even tell it because I want forgiveness, for either of us. I tell it because I think a lot of people live inside quiet disconnection and don't realize it until something irreversible happens. Because sometimes love doesn't end with hatred. Sometimes it ends with neglect. Sometimes it ends with two people slowly turning into strangers while still sharing the same space. And then one day, someone crosses a line that can't be uncrossed, and suddenly everyone wants the story to be simple. But it isn't. I still don't have a clean answer. I don't know if her betrayal erased my failures. Or if my failures created the kind of loneliness that made betrayal feel possible. All I know is that when love dies slowly, it leaves questions behind instead of closure. So here's what I'm left asking, and what I'll leave you with too. When trust is broken, is the worst part the act itself? Or the years of silence that made it possible? And if you've ever been on either side of that silence, what do you think matters more in the end, what was done? Or what was missing long before it happened? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this video with someone who appreciates emotionally real stories. Because some endings don't give answers. They only give mirrors.